Good afternoon. My name is Ray Uttenhove, and I have the pleasure of chairing the Women's Philanthropy Network. Welcome to our program today, Understanding the Impact of COVID-19 on Women. We're really grateful that you can be with us. WPN has a major goal of bringing our supporters together as activists and philanthropists to talk about the major issues that face women today. We began our educational series last fall with voting rights, and this summer we have been focused, or this spring and today, we're focused on the pandemic and what that has meant for all of us and how it's affecting our lives. I just want to alert you that we are preparing for our series that will follow in the fall, and your input is really important. You're going to get a survey after our program today, and we would love to hear back from you, both telling us about how you felt about our program on the pandemic and also ideas for next year. Gender equity is a major pillar of our work. And certainly, we are faced with so many issues over this last year and a half that raise the question of how women have been affected. We have an incredible panel today, and we are led by our Chair of Education, Kathy Henson, who is going to lead us in this discussion and also start by introducing our panelists. So Kathy, I'm going to turn the program to you.
Thank you, Ray. I am delighted to end our year-long webinar series on such a high note with our panel today. I've got to tell you, I've learned so much just preparing for it and getting to know our panelists. We know it's been a year like no other, and the impact on working women, particularly women who are parents of school-aged children, has been particularly challenging. I want to introduce our panelists today, starting with Dr. Misty Heggeness, who's a principal economist and senior advisor for the U.S. Census Bureau, Kathy Colbenson, the president and CEO of Kris 180, and Dr. Chris Byron, the Meredith Lepley Women Lead Chair in the Robinson College of Business at Georgia State University. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. We have so much to cover, and all of you have been working women through this pandemic, so I know you each have personal stories to share also. But let's start by asking Dr. Heggeness to let us know how bad this year from hell has actually been for working women. So Misty, I turn it over to you and let you give us some stark, objective economic data to set the context for our discussion today.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you today to talk about what's been happening with women and work in the pandemic. So I have just a few slides that I wanted to share. Let me pull them up. So I'm a principal economist and senior advisor at the U.S. Census Bureau. I just want to say at the beginning that any opinions and any errors are solely mine and do not reflect any opinions of the U.S. Census Bureau. So what has been going on with women and work during this pandemic? I think it's important to start at the very beginning before the pandemic kind of majorly hit us. And so if we look back in February of 2020, there was around 60 million women ages 25 to 64 who were actively working in the labor market, about 67 million men. And of those women working, about a third of them, so around 20 million, were women who were living with their own school-aged children. So, when the pandemic hit last March of 2020, it really did have an impact on working women because, there was a large proportion of them who were working and had kids who were in school and then were not in school. Back in the spring of 2020, I did some research on what was going on with parents and work right at the onset of the pandemic. So basically kind of the first week of the pandemic in the middle of March when things started shutting down. And my research shows that it was mothers who really took kind of the initial hit on their employment at the onset of the pandemic. So mothers were 69% more likely to take leave that first week of the pandemic in states that closed early compared to mothers in states that closed late. And there was really no difference in leave take up for fathers. Fathers, however, were impacted. So they worked basically the equivalent of around 1 hour during a 40-hour work week that first week in March. So they reduced their hours worked by about an hour. There was no difference. So moms who did keep on working, there was no difference in the number of hours they were working. And I think just to put this further into context from last spring, it's important to also recognize there was a lot, and there has been a lot of research showing that, while fathers did increase unpaid domestic chores and labor within the household after the onset of the pandemic, the increase was not as great as it was for mothers. So mothers disproportionately had an increased workload of unpaid labor and chores and childcare in the household once the pandemic hit. And the other piece too that I think is important to keep in mind is that a lot of mothers have burned through leave, both paid and unpaid leave, to deal with childcare issues. So if you look at leave banks for a lot of parents and mothers, you'll find that they're a lot less robust than they were before the pandemic. So if you think, from last spring up through where we are now, what's been going on, are we back to our pre-pandemic selves? If we look back, again, this is the pie chart that I showed on the earlier slide, where mothers of school-age children made up about a third of all actively working women in February 2020. And if we look at April of 2021, they've almost basically caught up in terms of the proportion of active working women from back in the spring. So you might have heard some of this information in the news media going on around how mothers are catching up. Mothers are catching up to women without children, and they're also catching up to fathers. So mothers were hit the hardest at the very beginning, but they've since caught back up. And that's kind of the storyline if you look at the traditional numbers and the traditional data that we have. But, I'm a working mother myself, and I know lots of working mothers, and I know that that is not telling really the full story. And so if you yourself are a working mother, you might be back to your getting close to your pre-pandemic 2019 self, but this is probably what you look like. So we've all been through multiple marathons at this point. So I want to take a minute here, and I'm gonna shift my screen share. But the New York Times back in either January or February had been reporting on the struggles for working mothers for a while, and they actually developed this hotline that you can call, and I think it still works today, called the Primal Scream Hotline, where you can call in and share anything that you really feel the need to share into their voice recorded space. And so I want to play this little clip that they put together on mothers calling into their hotline.
Welcome to the New York Times Primal Scream Line, where the floor is yours to yell, laugh, cry, or vent for a solid minute.
I just wanted to say,
I'm so sick of my goddamn kids
This pandemic has made me realize that maybe I'm not cut out to be a mother.
I am doing my 6th load of laundry today.
Oh, God, every day I think I can't do this again. But then I do. I get it. I get up and I do it because that's just what parents do, right?
All right. Give me a second to go back to my PowerPoint slide here. Okay. So, it's been rough. It's been rough on parents generally, but it has been particularly and uniquely rough on mothers. And you can observe this if you just look at all of the content going on in the media around the challenges for working mothers. So you have the Wall Street Journal talking about how working parents are hitting their coronavirus breaking point and paying for it, either through burning through leave or not being able to work. HuffPost wrote, COVID-19 is a rolling disaster for working mothers. Of course, the New York Times has had multiple reporting on this. NPR talks about the balance of living in your office from folks who were teleworking. And then more recently in The Atlantic, there was a story on professional women who are leaning out. So women who, have the ability to stop working if they choose because somebody else in their household is bringing in income, and some women are making this choice because it's all just too much for them. So I want to just kind of wrap up this idea with this piece that I wrote a week or two ago, talking about why is it so hard to understand women in work. I think that there is a component of the way in which we develop our national statistics that is just historically based on kind of a dominant perspective of work that really doesn't grasp all of the nuanced work that women do. And so, in this piece, I argue that as a society, we need to do better, and we need to start encouraging our national statistical offices to produce data that really represents the nuanced lives and the nuanced work of women and men so that policymakers can begin making better, more informed decisions. And so I think we can all agree that even though some of us, have been able to, and women and mothers in particular, have been kind of catching up to others, that it hasn't been easy, that it's been extremely difficult, and that there are still a lot of policy issues that we need to think about addressing if we're going to make work for women. And so here's the Primal Scream line in case any of you feel the need to call in. And then this is where you can find me. I'm on Twitter. I write stories about this topic on Medium, and I also have a newsletter on Substack.
Thank you, Misty. I look forward during our panel discussion to follow up on some of these themes that you've raised, including, are there long-term career disadvantages to women due to what's happened? And are we going to invest in the care, early childhood care, elder care, to enable women to get back to the workforce and balance all those life-work issues? So thank you for kind of laying out the issues for us.
Thank you.
Let me turn to introducing Kathy Colbenson, who, as president and CEO of Chris 180, will tell us a little bit about her organization, but what it was like to go from having 400 employees in the office to having 4 employees in the office and trying to juggle the work that your organization does. So Kathy, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your remarks.
It's a real honor to be on this panel, and I want to say thank you for that. Chris 180 is a behavioral health organization that provides an array of services, including counseling, homes for children in foster care. We work with homeless youth and families. We provide behavioral health services to families in their own homes in the community. and have a host of partnerships where we work in, provide the behavioral health services and after school programs. So needless to say, we were tremendously impacted. And 74% of our workforce are women. And 75% of that number are either parents or caregivers. And I'm glad we're going to talk about the caregiver portion a little bit too later, because that also has had an impact. And I think to talk about the impact and the toll on our workforce, we first have to talk a little bit about the pandemic and the issues of social justice, because in 2020, we have all experienced a shared collective trauma that has become the water that we all swim in every single day. And coupled with that are the grief and the loss that go along with schools being closed, childcare centers being closed, not being able to see friends or family, businesses cut back, toilet paper shortages that impacted everyone, the fear of COVID, the political climate, and the loss of our rituals and routines. So that's the backdrop for everybody's experience. And then to top it off from a mental health perspective, we're already working with people who've experienced trauma, past trauma. It could be mental health issues, it could be domestic violence, abuse, and those are suffered regardless of socioeconomic levels or standings. But you add to that, a lot of the families and the children we serve and the women are dealing with poverty and housing instability, homelessness, food insecurity, the lack of electronics or even internet to help their children learn, and living doubled up. We worked with one family who had 12 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. So there was a lack of privacy for therapy. And so our therapist could telework. So half of our workforce could telework and provide telecounseling, but the other half had to show up. And we had staff shortages. As I said, our workforce is primarily women. And they did experience the brunt of elder care as well as child care, and the stress of wanting to make sure their children were learning while they were receiving and helping the people who were impacted, who were our clients. So our therapist especially really struggled with the impact, the emotional and mental health toll of the pandemic, not only from receiving it from the people they were trying to help, because we were in 68 schools with school-based mental health, receiving that angst from the children and from the parents, as well as living through their own trauma and their own stress and their own figuring out, because you can't really have a counseling session that's interrupted by your children needing something at that moment. So it was very, very difficult for them to achieve some kind of what are the boundaries that are okay with me, with my children? Is my spouse there or my partner there to help? What to do if there is no one there? Some of our therapists went to working half-time. Some of them worked even less than that, negotiated things with their family. And actually, some of our young employees just packed up and went home and stayed with their family during the pandemic. So it has taken a huge emotional and psychological toll on our workforce as they have still tried to show up for the clients that we serve. And I just have to say, I couldn't be more proud of the work that Chris 180's team has done during the pandemic, because we did show up and families and moms were able to figure out how to negotiate it, because as I mentioned, our in-home working with families, they would pack lawn chairs in their cars and go and work with the families who couldn't be seen through telecounseling. So there was a lot of creativity, a lot of really struggling also with burnout because the difficulty setting their own schedules and setting the boundaries so that they could feel good about the attention they were giving their children and the attention they were giving the clients who were children. So the majority of our staff were able to maintain employment and were able to be flexible. But what we're seeing now is really anxiety about returning to the workplace, afraid of having COVID, afraid of taking it back to the family, struggling because it's still summer, of how to care for their children and begin to show up more in office locations. I think that we're looking at and preparing for really long-term impacts of the pandemic that are related to exhaustion, which Misty mentioned, chronic fatigue, feelings of isolation, and just traumatic reactions to triggers because of the prolonged chronic stress that not only our workforce, but our clients were living under. And what from a mental health perspective, one of the things that we're seeing both in our workforce and with clients is that the exacerbation of the mental health challenges, of the trauma, the stress related to trauma, can lead to attachment issues with children. And then children can develop what's called insecure attachments, which then impacts child development, which then contributes to disruptive behaviors and mental health issues with children. And that parents have really had to struggle with balancing attention they give to their children with attention they give to work, or to, even if you're living in poverty, attention that's necessary to make sure your family has enough food to eat. And, I think Misty mentioned that also it's fallen on women. Although men have picked it up a little, it's fallen mostly on women to care about the children, to care about the parents living in the home or elder care, and to be able to do the housework because that's still a burden that's added to the challenges that women have faced in the pandemic that are on our workforce and that are clients that we're working with. So it's been a very, very difficult year. We are struggling right now with hiring therapists and bringing therapists back because so many did make other choices or just said, I'm not ready to return to the workforce full time. It's just too much. I need time to process my own trauma. So it is a real challenge. And I've spent a lot of my time, I call it giving grace, but trying to provide a safe space for the women in our workforce to talk about the things that they're struggling with, because they need to be able to talk about it too. You've got to fill up your own cup, and you've got to learn how to take care of yourself before you can really reach other people. And a lot of women have been very struggling with that tremendously during this time. So I'm going to look forward to questions that people might have about this real life example of the struggles that women have been going through.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. I remember when I first spoke with you and you remarking on the loss of structure because of not having school to organize lives around has really so negatively impacted both children and parents, and the lack of the social and emotional connections. And as you just mentioned, women, your workforce, a lot of them are choosing not to come back, but it really isn't a choice when you have no options.
Right.
So I look forward to, exploring that more in our panel discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me introduce Dr. Chris Byron, who in addition to being a full-time faculty member at Georgia State, also does research. And she has found maybe one silver lining in this pandemic. And who would have thought it was due to online meetings that we're all growing a little weary of. But I was so delighted to find out, Kris, that there are some silver linings to the work at home online meeting universe that we've all been living in the past year. So let me turn it over to you to describe what your life has been and your research has shown.
Yeah, thank you so much. We were really surprised too. So let me just, preface this by saying, so my main area of research is perception at work. So how people perceive others. And then a closely related area is looking at gender differences, gender diversity at work. And so, we decided to look at these two different things kind of in the age of COVID. And what prompted us to look at this was really some stories that my colleagues at Boston College and at Washington University and at Arizona State, we had noticed in the popular press where there were, you might have seen these examples, a news anchor, who's presenting the news at home because that's where he was presenting the news, and his kid comes in and everybody just thinks this is the cutest thing in the whole wide world. Or a weather forecaster who's, giving the news, forecasting the weather from home, and his kid comes toddling in and everybody thinks this is the cutest thing in the whole wide world. And we thought, would these reactions have been the same if that had been a female news anchor and if that had been a female weather forecaster? It just seemed hard to believe. One thing that we know from, decades of research looking at gender differences is that there are very few actual gender differences. Gender differences tend to be quite small when we look at them. But what tend to be more sizable is differences in expectations for men and women. So that's where we see the big differences. So we would similarly have expected that we would see those kinds of differences when it comes to kind of these online meetings, that if a woman is, in an online meeting and her kid comes in, that people might not think that's quite so cute. Or that if her dog starts barking, that people also might not think that that's quite so cute. We suspected that there might be these differing expectations because, again, there's just so much research showing that there are these pretty sizable differences in expectations for men and for women, both at home, but also at work and, of course, in other domains. And this, of course, has COVID relevance, had relevance to, what was going on in the world right then and right now, because so many professional women who were still working are having so many online meetings. I went from having some online meetings to having just a ton of online meetings, and I'm sure other people share that experience. So we wanted to see, all right, so what are these differences? Are there differences first, and what are they? So we ran a series of studies. We ran them in all different kinds of designs. So we ran a series of experiments, but we also did some what we call critical incident studies, where we ask people more open-ended questions. And what we found across all these studies, I think probably about 5 or 6, I can't remember how many in total that we ran. What we found was that there were no gender differences. And this is actually a silver lining, and I think quite a sizable silver lining. What we found was, instead, when we started looking into this, the richness of our data, was that there were some real bright spots, as Kathy alluded to. Let me just read to you some quotes. So yesterday, I was on a call with 2 other coworkers. We've all been working from home during the pandemic, and people have generally been working very hard to focus on work and separate work and family time as much as possible. It was an important meeting. During the meeting, one of my colleagues' son walked into the room and demanded she open a piece of candy for him. I was so impressed with how she handled the situation. She asked for 1 minute to deal with it and opened the candy for her son, but explained why what he did wasn't appropriate, and said they would talk about a better system for what he could do in terms of coming into the office and times that he needed to wait. The way she was able to parent and also maintain her professionalism was impressive, and I think even more highly of her now than I did before. And that was just one of many, many other examples like that. Again, our study, at least those critical incident examples, were all limited to professional employees, but I'm going to read to you a few other examples because I think they're really telling. What we ended up finding was that these experiences were really humanizing for people. What they offered was some additional insight into people, into their coworkers' lives that they didn't see otherwise. I did a pretty large-scale study maybe about 5 years ago, looking at workplace personalization. So examples of it are behind me. Meaning, so kind of, it's like diplomas, tchotchkes, other ways that people personalize their offices. And, there what we were finding was that personalization really oftentimes served as conversation starters. They were ways that that allowed people to find out, oh, you have this interest, I have this interest too, and then it would start a conversation. Or that it was a way for someone to individuate, for them to show, this is how I'm different from other people. So I'm the office historian, or I'm the really organized one here. So there's something, or I'm the engineer on staff. There's something that's unique about me that's different from other people. But what we found in these particular sets of studies was something a little different, because it wasn't about similarities and differences, which is an important part of really portraying the self at work. But it was really about the extent to which employees saw their coworkers as kind of whole people. So humanizing means less like a machine and less like an animal. So meaning they have more, they're seen as having more emotion and as being a fuller, richer person. So I'll give you another example. My coworker was so calm and relaxed. This is after her 3-year-old son came in during the meeting singing. My coworker was so calm and relaxed, and her face just showed joy and appreciation while talking to her son. I know how frustrating it can be to work with so many distractions, so I was really touched by her demeanor. It was so nice to see our colleagues as parents, since we so often just see their work personas. We saw this also for men. So this is a slightly different example. So I could give you other examples of men and their children, but this is an example of a man interacting with a pet, but it's a very similar idea. On the last video the group had, while he was speaking, we heard a very loud meow. It sounded like this cat was yelling. It was so loud. This burly, gruff man bent down, and when he sat back up, he was holding a very cute, fluffy kitten, like a baby, and he was talking to it like a baby and nuzzling faces with it. That was very unexpected. We all noticed by the amount of giggles. And so there's so many of these, what I find very heartening, again, is this really humanizing, but also seeing people's coworkers as more whole. So you're seeing a window into your coworkers' lives that go beyond what you would normally see. Because what we normally bring to work is what we're calling these kind of curated self, right? So at work, you're seeing just really one-sided me. I'm not gonna, You don't see me on my flip flops. You don't see the whole me. You don't, right? And so, but if you're looking at me from my home office and seeing the interruptions, you might meet my dog or might meet my cat. You might see my husband. So you just get to see a better sense of what someone's home environment is like. I'm going to share one more quote that I think was also really good. I had a meeting with one of my mentors from home through Zoom. I knew she was married. What I didn't know was that she had 2 little kids who are actually twins. What I first heard in the background was one of the kids coming up to her wanting to show her a toy while being in the video call with me. It made me think that people also have a home side in which they seem more comfortable around their family and very loving, which is different from the focused, determined persona that they are at work. So again, it's this really cool insights that you get into your coworkers. And I think that's just, it was just this bright side of the pandemic that we weren't expecting to find, but we were able to, after we got some inkling of this, that we were able to replicate it in an additional series of studies using different methods. So just to summarize, we didn't find the gender differences in expectations that we were expecting, and that's a great news. But what we did find was this really great story for so many employees that that these kinds of insights that you're getting about your coworkers allows you to see a more full picture of them, and that can be very humanizing.
Thank you, Kris. And let me follow up with a question we've gotten, and that is, how do you create personal space for your meetings when you're sharing your home with other family members who also need personal space for their online meetings?
It's hard, isn't it? I mean, it's really hard. I think, everyone's going to have a different situation. I mean, sometimes I think it's about, scheduling it. I mean, right now I said to my husband, you're going to have to take the dog and the cat because I just do not want them. Particularly my cat is actually the one that's loud. My dog's pretty quiet, but I just didn't want them interrupting. So sometimes it's negotiating, when are things really important and you can't be interrupted. So negotiating that with someone else, because there probably are times where maybe you can be interrupted. But I don't know. I think different people's situations are going to vary a whole lot. It can be hard.
Yeah, I've talked to some people who've had to go into the bathroom.
Right.
Or the closet.
So, yeah.
Right.
And then I just enjoyed seeing Misty's dog walk behind you. I just have to say I like the animals and kids when they show up. But it is very hard depending on the space that you're living in. And, depending on the number of kids. And for me, depending on the number of animals.
Right.
So, yeah.
Did any of you find that you would not participate if you didn't know you could be in a controlled space and be able to control the variables? I think my husband is one who's he'll do it anywhere, anytime, under any circumstances, but I am much more needing a quiet space with no distractions. And I just wondered if that's a male-female difference or just introvert-extrovert difference or whatever.
For me, it depends. It depends on what the subject is, what the focus is required. It depends on, and if you're doing therapy, you really can't be interrupted. So it depends on the task to me.
And who you're meeting with too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm meeting with a close colleague, it's like anything goes really. I mean, in some ways, we're going to be polite to each other and respect each other's time. But I think we're very forgiving of each other. Mm-hmm. And I think also, since doing this research, I think I'm much less uptight about this kind of stuff. I feel more, when I was teaching online, if I would show them, like my dog's pretty big, so you can't see her now, but, you know, like during class, I'm like, hey guys, want to see my dog? And I showed her. And I'll tell you, on my teaching evaluations, I had multiple students say that that was like the highlight of their, I mean, maybe that says something more about how boring I am as a professor, but, but I like to think that it's just that they really got to see, like they got to see, like they, you know, they're like, oh, you're professor, but like they don't get to see me.
But you're also human.
Right. They got to find out that I was human, which I think was something that they really liked.
Let me ask
Yeah,
one
so
more work from home question. You know, since it's now a continuum of home and office, and Kathy, you alluded to the fact that some people are anxious about going back full time. So what can we save? What are the good things we want to save about the work from home economy as we think about transitioning back to the workplace?
For me, I think that sometimes you can focus more and get more done, depending on what your home is like. And it is causing us to think about what is the work that can be done at home and be done well, as opposed to what's the work that requires brainstorming, interaction, those kinds of things. So
I will add, I mean, I do think, you know, if anything, this pandemic has really demonstrated the capability that we have as humans and how technology has advanced to, you know, create an ability for a lot of us to continue working even though we were trapped in our house. And there are folks who thrive in that environment. You know, I'm much more productive when I'm working from home because I don't have all of the distractions of the office. But for some other people, it's the reverse. They're much more productive when they're in the office. I should caveat that by saying I'm much more productive when I work from home and my children are away at school and my husband is off at the office. So, you know, I mean, I think it all, you know, there's variation there, and I think employers have become a little bit more flexible in kind of their thinking about how we get work done. I think flexibility with telework has the opportunity to create lots of additional types of jobs for women that they might not have otherwise been able to have because they're trying to balance family with work. So I think that's a potential positive that might come out of the pandemic as well.
And Misty, let me kind of segue and follow up, starting with you, about investing in the care economy. You know, we've all kind of taken for granted the K-12 space that, you know, you just have to get your kid into kindergarten and then you're good until they graduate from high school. And what the pandemic shed light on is not only the disruption when that goes away, but there is no safety net in the 0 to 5 space or in the elder care space. And I see similarities between those two networks where, you know, it's a cobbled together hodgepodge of public, private, in-home centers, and the providers are barely making ends meet, and the consumers can barely pay what's being charged. So, you know, you talk a lot about infrastructure as not only roads and bridges, but accessible, affordable childcare and elder care so that women and other caretakers can work. Can you follow up on that a little bit and tell us what you see?
Yeah, so I mean, I do think it's rather unfortunate lately that this idea has been really politicized. But you know, if anything, the pandemic has really shown us that opportunity for work is not equal for all, and the individuals within our society that carry a heavier burden of unpaid, invisible workloads, whether it's taking care of parents or taking care of children, really are at a disadvantage in terms of being able to fully engage in the economy and fully engage in paid work. And that, at the end of the day, really, really reduces economic growth and development. And so, you know, in so many ways, we're shooting ourselves in the foot as a society by not fully investing in some type of system that allows for affordable and accessible high quality care, both for our elders and for our little people. And I don't know why this is controversial, or, you know, why it confuses me as to why this isn't just something that is a no-brainer that we should be investing in, but for whatever reason, it's not. And, you know, I think the key here is that we need to really make it known and well-known and publicized that, you know, we are hindering our own well-being for everybody in society by not creating systems that really support that type of infrastructure.
Amen.
Kathy, what did you see your employees struggling with both the child care and the elder care?
That they didn't necessarily have the resources to be, well, if they were a single mom, they had to figure out, I mean, my assistant brought her son to work, and a relative, a close relative, but she was even worried about that, kept her infant daughter. So, and not every employer is able to do that. So it's, I saw people really struggle with that. A couple of therapists that I know actually stopped working to live at home to take care of their parents. And because they could live with their parents, and they would, had the parent not been ill, they would have continued to work. So there were just a number of situations like that where people had to make really hard choices that may impact their career long term, you know, and that may not be easy to recover from. And it's something people shouldn't have to choose, because then we're in a politicized climate where, well, they just don't want to work. Well, that's not true. That wasn't true in any of the cases that, you know, the needing to, you know, and my dad had ALS several years ago and died. And I thought about during the pandemic, gosh, what would I have done if the caregivers who helped stayed with him while I was at work were not available because of the pandemic, or something had happened. You know, what I would have had to make a very, very difficult choices about what I did. And I, you know, and I have the luxury of having a lot of paid time off, but, you know, it's just a very, I agree with what Misty said about infrastructure. You know, we need to think broadly about what is the infrastructure that allows our economy, our society, and our people to thrive.
And Kris, I'm going to ask you, as our silver lining expert today, you know, given that we were able to see people in their home environments and saw some of the caregiving responsibilities, or just in general, employers becoming more aware of it because they lost employees, do you see the opportunity to change? And if so, how?
Can you ask your question again, please? I don't think I understood it. I'm so sorry.
Well, as employers become more aware of, you know, these obligations that their employees have now, that they didn't before, perhaps. Do you think that will drive change in corporate America or organizational America?
I see. I gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, it would be helpful to the extent, I think this kind of goes back to what Misty said before. I mean, you know, one thing that would really help is for people to stop seeing childcare or elder care as being a woman's issue, because it shouldn't be a woman's issue. It should be a people's issue. I mean, you know, before this call, I was joking, you know, I said, oh, my husband's babysitting. But, you know, my husband and I say stuff like that as jokes. You know, to me, you're parenting, you know, like, there's parents and then there's babysitters, but babysitters are not parents. And so these are not women's issues or men's issues. They're employees' issues. And the reason that probably that we don't get much traction for things like affordable, high quality childcare is because it's seen as a woman's issue. I mean, not to be super cynical, but I can be kind of cynical. And so, yeah, I think, maybe one of the things that's come out of this is that these parenting issues are not like all of a sudden they became not just women's problems entirely, right? I mean, if the kids are toddling through the room at any time, maybe that's a good thing, because now all of a sudden it's not just, it's not just mom's problem, it's dad's problem too. So, will organizations respond? I mean, gosh, that would be really nice. I mean, I know a lot of my friends who work outside of academia are saying that they're pushing their employers to, allow for more flexibility. And, that's a potential bright spot too, because a lot of people would prefer some flexibility to cut down on commuting times. I'm sorry, Misty, did you?
Yeah, no, just to follow along with that. I mean, I totally agree with what you said. And I think, the reason why potentially it hasn't been such a priority in the US enough to actually take action on it is, one, because, we have these traditional norms and we think of the family as a private entity. And so therefore it's private problems. And so it doesn't require any type of systemic or employer intervention. And I think that one of the other reasons is because women lots of times, and I'm specifically speaking about myself, like I, carried a huge burden when my kids were infants and toddlers, in terms of getting them to daycare, in terms of just, pure running myself ragged, trying to keep my job and, grow teeny tiny humans. And, I think when women struggle with that, they feel like somehow they're personally failing. And it's not a personal failure. It is a system that is set up to, not let you succeed. And I think the pandemic has really exposed that. And so, one of my biggest fears is that we get out of this pandemic and women just make it just enough better that we kind of go back to the way things were. And I think that would be a huge, gigantic loss for all of us. I think, it's important to keep the momentum and convert this from a personal private failure issue to a systemic issue within our society that doesn't allow all of us an equal opportunity to work at our maximum potential.
Mm-hmm. And let me follow up, Misty, on one thing you and I had talked about another time, and that is, and we know that, the challenges run the gamut from the single parent to the two couple professional parents. But even at the, most optimal circumstances, it's often the mom who's doing the scheduling and the thinking and the worrying and the ferrying. And it can be that the dad steps in to actually take Johnny to wherever, but mom has done all the thinking, the mental preparation. Yeah. Did you find that to be true?
So I think there's been significant research on that. And recently there was a story in the New York Times about that, about the mental load on mothers. And Eve Rodsky has written a really good book called Fair Play that speaks specifically to that, the mental load, the additional mental load that women experience within the household for all of the, unpaid domestic work that we engage in. And even if somebody else is taking up the slack, we're still, like you said, they're organizing, they're structuring everything, and maybe passing it off to somebody else to implement. But yeah, I mean, it really did. There's lots of ways in which we can all nudge each other towards a more gender equal society. And I think the first step is to recognize all of these things that we don't talk about, all of the ways in which, women are kind of silently carrying us forward, and start, talking about those issues, and then start reprioritizing and actually taking action. And, I think there are some easy ways that we can do that. One is we can teach the next generation. So, if you have a son and daughter. If one of them goes out and mows the lawn, make the other one go out and mow the lawn. If one of them does the dishes, make the other one do the dishes.
Mhm.
I think employers can play a big role in nudging. Male executives that take leave for care set an enormous example within the organization that it's okay. I mean, we need to make it okay for men to be caregivers. And we need to kind of take the shame out of that, because I think a lot of times it's not that men don't want to step in, it's that we as a society have kind of told them that's not really where they belong. And I think that just hurts everybody.
Well, ladies, let me wrap this up by asking each of you to comment on what are you looking forward to in terms of getting back to normal, and what do you hope to hold on to from this past year? So Kris, let me start with you, because I know you went from teaching in person to teaching solely online, and I guess you'll return to primarily in person, some online. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so let's see. So I guess I would say that is probably one thing I'm looking forward to, is not teaching solely online. That was a struggle. Teaching to the system couldn't handle having everyone's video on, so I had to ask everybody to, turn their videos off. So I was talking to nobody. So that was really not fun. So definitely I'd say for my teaching, I would say I'm looking forward to getting back in the classroom and having, developing those relationships. I teach only MBA students and doctoral students. So forming those relationships, and our doctoral students just got visas. And so they're able to come to the country. So this is, all fantastic news. I mean, things are just starting to open up, and that's fantastic. But I think what I'll miss out on, some of this, like Misty said, I mean, this ability to stay home and get so much work done has also been, something that I'll miss that some too.
Okay, Kathy, what about you?
I am so looking forward to brainstorming and feeling the energy in the room, because it's one of my favorite things to do, and being able to. I have a large staff, and being able to interact with people just on the fly, in the common spaces. And so I've missed the opportunity to connect with people with the small talk. And I've also missed hugs. I've missed that so badly. So those are the things I'll miss. I do, as much as I can't believe I'm even saying this, sometimes being able to meet with a large group that you can't pull together with a Zoom meeting is a good thing. We're going to keep doing town halls and all staff meetings virtually with a virtual component. That way people don't have to miss. So we're going to be doing some of that, but my eyeballs get really tired of Zoom, and they don't get tired with seeing people in person. So
thank you. And Misty?
So I am really looking forward to in-person conferences, to just hang out with only adults. I have avoided conferences this year because I just don't have the mental capability to do Zoom all day in conferences. So I'm really excited for that. And just in terms of one thing I wish I could keep, but it probably won't happen, is having all of my family around for lunches. My daughter went back to school like a month ago, and so then there was 3 of us around the table for lunch instead of 4, and it was awkward. And I realized how much dialogue and conversation, additional dialogue and conversation our family has been having because of the pandemic. And that's, I guess, one of the silver linings of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Ladies, on behalf of the Women's Philanthropy Network here at Georgia State, I thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and your empathy with us today. It's been wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.